Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is the unsolved mystery in your local area? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A girl I went to school with went missing in the woods. There's a Crime Watch Daily special on it. Molly Miller was her name. I remember when I realized she went missing. I always thought she was really pretty in school, blue eyes and sleek black hair, and she said hi to me when I was new and just thought that was so sweet. I moved to Texas the next year and happened to see her face on the board at Walmart. I was like, that looks like Molly. And it was, unfortunately. This was about 10 years ago, and no one has heard from her, and there are still no answers. A lady was stabbed 27 times while locked in her apartment. The boyfriend was banging on her door for her to let him in while it was happening. She was heard screaming. There were no signs of forced entry or exit, no fingerprints on the knife, no traces of anyone else in the apartment, no nothing. The case was ruled as a suicide, but recently opened back up because they skipped over a few details or something like that. A young woman's body was found behind a local fire station off a main highway that runs to Myrtle Beach. She was supposed to be visiting her dad and did make it to Myrtle Beach from Florida, but never made it to see him. A golf cart rental company denied her service because, according to the employee, she was acting strange. For reasons unknown, she headed back the way she came without seeing her father after she just drove 10 hours to visit him. Her dad eventually called the cops because she didn't show. Her car was found burned off a desolate dirt road near my childhood home an hour outside of Myrtle, same as the fire station. Eyewitness said they saw a man running away from the burning car and getting into an SUV with what was assumed to be a second perpetrator. The police say that her death resulted from falling off the water tower behind the station, but the entire case is so bizarre. I hope they find real answers for her family because there are so many factors not adding up. Hopefully the police did a thorough investigation of that firehouse and the people working there that night. I hope her father and family find the answers that they deserve. There was a house fire in Platte, South Dakota, about an hour from my hometown. Okay, but the whole family died in it. Mom, dad, 4 children. At first they thought, what a tragedy. And then they assumed that the dad shot everyone, as there were bullet wounds in each person, set the house afire, then killed himself. Cue the news and a very good news anchor investigating the whole thing. She was getting deep into what happened and found out the dad and mom were embezzling money from an organization they were a part of to help Native American education, $1 million embezzled. Then, the police drove into some scattered security camera footage, small rural town, and saw a vehicle drive to and from the property in the wee hours of the night. Murder-suicide or homicide? Said anchor was getting closer to solving the dang thing, and rumor has it she ended up getting death threats and stopped all coverage. This would only have to be true because she had a special on it often, and there was just no closure on why they stopped looking into it. Not a peep about it since. There's a lot to this story, and I summed it up best I could. Maybe I should try to find a Crime Junkies episode on it. Back in the 1920s, a small town in Appalachia, there was a woman who was found with her throat slit ear to ear, 3 gunshot wounds to the back of her head, and a single shot to her newly pregnant stomach. Her body was dumped on a basically deserted mountain and found after she was missing for a week. She was brought to the morgue, along with her purse full of her belongings. The next day, the medical examiner goes to perform an autopsy on her body. She was found late at night and finds that her body is missing. The only thing left was her hairbrush that looked as if the body thief had accidentally dropped it on the floor. Fast forward to 2010, a very old hotel in the town burns to the ground. As they demolish it, a bust-up of old concrete, they find a body. They did some DNA testing and find out it was that woman whose body went missing all those years ago. It's believed that her husband killed her, because everyone in that small town knew she was friendly with other men and had gotten pregnant by his business partner. Since her husband was fabulously wealthy, he paid everyone else and paid someone to hide her body. We supposedly have an emu farm in our town. The problem is that nobody has seen it, but we keep finding emus in random places. My total spotting since 2013 is 11 emus. We know there has to be somebody with an emu farm because we knew this guy who knew this guy who knew this guy. Everyone we meet assures us there is a farm. Maybe. I mean, there has to be, right? Our closest random residential emu is 4 houses down, living amongst the cattle on a farm. The folks are kind enough to take care of it, mostly because it refuses to leave, and we don't know what to do with it. The emu has been proclaimed Edith. Why the F is this random car driving around the block over and over again in the middle of the night? Like, seriously, I spent an hour last night just watching the car. I'm not even sure it's from here. A couple weeks ago, I tried to find what house it came from, but came from outside the neighborhood. The car is green, with no license plate, and is a Ford. The driver appears to be different every night, and it's freaking me the F out. This isn't a local area mystery, it's just a me mystery, but still. The disappearance of Kyron Horman. If you're anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, I'm sure you've heard the name. He disappeared in 2010, and even though the stepmother was highly suspected, no evidence was ever found. They still hold events, and I've seen a billboard or 2 around in recent years. Hopefully, one day they find his remains and bring some closure to family. Missing infant Christopher Abeda, who vanished on July 15, 1986 from Colorado Springs. His family believed a woman named Emma Bradshaw was involved in the baby's disappearance, and she sued them and won $150,000 in damages in preventing her from being employed. The Colorado Springs Police Department destroyed some of the evidence sometime after the infant's disappearance, which is quite effed up. Sadly, there are no suspects, and both of his parents are dead, but his siblings continue to hope he is still alive and continue to search for him. A missing child case that's almost 40 years old. I don't know if there's much hope for the solution to this case, but I hope for his siblings' sake that there is someday. In June 2010, a bunch of animals were killed or injured at Happy Ralph's in St. Catharines. About half a dozen of the animals had been shot with pellet and BB guns, and that 4 small animals had been killed. I've yet to hear any news if the people who did it were caught. I grew up going to the park for picnics, hide and seek in the field or forested areas, and walks along the lake. In the summer, the petting zoo was a treat. It was such a shock when it all happened. They still have some animals there to this day, but it looks like the enclosures are much more secure. Is my neighbor dead? My next door neighbor is an older lady with a bunch of adopted special needs children. Unfortunately, a while back she was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer. 3 nights ago, there were a whole bunch of ambulances and cops at her house. I wasn't there, I was at fencing practice. For a few days, her house was quiet, but then a car started coming in and out. She may have been having the same client coming in for her massage clinic, or it's her kid's caretaker. None of us have any clue what happened. We also don't have the courage to go and ask her kids if she died. A nearby reserve. It's a native Canadian reserve. It's where I grew up. I have little folk tales that my parents told me, but back to the mystery. I remember my dad telling me that one night, thundering 11 p.m., he was in the kitchen and other people have seen or heard the same stuff in the community. What my dad saw, he decided to look out the window and saw a little 1 to 2 foot tall person or people running around as each lightning strike moving fast around the yard, just scouring, doing stuff. And there is an island not too far away from the shore. It's called Sugar Island, and there's a folk tale about that's where the little people live nearby, and in the winter, when people would go ice fishing, they're seen little footprints going to that island. People never found out if they were, and no one ever dared to go to the island. Can only imagine that. Chilling. The disappearance of a bunch of young girls in New England during the 1970s. There were a bunch of girls that went missing, most of which had blonde hair and blue eyes. Only a few bodies were ever recovered, and they never caught the guy responsible, though there were a few prison confessions to it, and many believe he was a carny that did his killings while traveling with a circus around the East Coast. One of the girls that went missing was named Lisa White, and was one of my mom's classmates. They never found her body. My mom did recall a pretty scary incident though that took place a few weeks before Lisa disappeared, where she was followed by a couple in a car on her way home from school who tried to coax her to accept a ride, which in those days was kind of odd considering most kids didn't take the bus. As a kid, My mom also fit the type of blonde hair, blue eyes young girl, so I wouldn't be surprised if those people were the culprits. A very wealthy couple were probably murdered. There is no trace of them. Their money manager supposedly committed suicide by cutting the arteries of his thighs. He wasn't really a manager of all their money, but of the business, and was embezzling. Their last name was Calvert. They lived on Hilton Head Island. The story got on the news, but our investigators are idiots and probably didn't want any help from federal agencies. Anything to make sure everyone in the world thinks Hilton Head is 100% safe. Let the story die rather than solve it. The suicide seems suspicious, to be honest, and a long time ago, cocaine was flowing through Hilton Head from boat. Maybe they were wrapped up in some sort of drug thing, or maybe it was just the money guy. But it just seems so odd to take yourself out after you murdered your bosses. They both seemed very nice when they would frequent the restaurant I used to work at, very kind and happy. The story also died out really quickly, but it did have a couple national segments for maybe a week, and after that, there was maybe 1 or 2 articles on an anniversary of their deaths. I think this case is pretty well known. There's even a movie about it. The Hinterkaifeck murders. I live not far from that place. Basically, in 1922, an unknown man killed a farmer, his entire family, and the housemaid, a total of 6 people. He then stayed in the house for approximately 3 more days, fed the animals, and took care of the farm, with the bodies rotting away in the barn, which caused the killings to go unnoticed for a while. That's pretty much the hard facts. The rest is a mystery. There's no apparent motive, police investigations were sloppy, and important clues got lost. In 2007, there was a new investigation. The police claimed they were absolutely certain they found out who it was, but they still haven't disclosed it, because living relatives of the murderer want to stay anonymous. We may never know. I've never actually been to the place myself. The farmhouse is long gone, it's just a field now. Also, the locals try to discourage people from going there. They don't want tourists swarming the place. Theo Hayes. He was an 18-year-old Belgian backpacker on a trip to Byron Bay, Australia. Was seen in a nightclub at 11 p.m. the night he went missing in 2018, but was kicked out because they thought he was too drunk. According to his phone, which was never found, but his family were able to access his Google account, he left and went to the base of the cliffs at the headland. The last message sent from his phone was to his stepsister Emma, which according to the article I read to refresh my memory was a light-hearted message in French. Theo's body was never found, nor his phone. I joined multiple search parties that went looking for his body, but we never found anything. Maura Murray from Hanson, Massachusetts. She was in college at the time. She emailed her professors saying there was a death in her family and she would not be attending class. Drove up to New Hampshire in her beat-up car that she knew she shouldn't drive that far, and her car was found on the side of the road in a snowbank, and she's never been seen since. My mom was in her grade, and they played sports together and had many mutual friends. There are tons of podcasts and stuff on her case, and the FBI very recently started looking into it. Has anyone listened to any of the podcasts about this case? Are there any updates? Feel free to post and let us know about it. Thanks, guys. Becky's Grave, Lehigh Valley Mystery. From what I understand, Becky was between 12 and 14 when she was hanging out with a couple of older teenage creeps, and they abused her and left her to die in the river. Becky was a resident of Darktown, which is basically like one road off of Caddy. Her father was, as legend tells, a pagan who had a very metal gravestone made for her. I think she died in the 80s. Bless Becky. It still makes me sad. Lindsay Baum went missing in 2009. She was 10 years old. She was walking home from a friend's house when she disappeared. Grays Harbor County is a small, and McCleary, the town she lived in, is tiny. The kind of place where most everybody knows everybody, and you didn't always lock your doors. Despite searching for weeks, nothing was found. In 2017, her partial remains were found by hunters in a remote location of eastern Washington. There likely wasn't enough to determine a cause of death or time of death due to the wildlife in the area. Stories at the time went around for sure. There have been suspects over the years, but nothing concrete so far. I'm only a few years older than her and remember how long the towns were an absolute terror. well past when the news started to forget. They still post banners on the main roads through town. A guy was found hanging in a tree in the middle of my town. Nothing added up though, like how he was hanging and how his body had decayed so fast, but the marks from the rope on the tree were barely there. I found out the truth though. He had cut coke with baking soda, and people found out and beat him with a bat, then stuck him in a freezer for a couple of weeks. He was alive the whole time. When he finally passed, the people covered it up by hanging him. He was very high up in the tree, but there was no ladder or any way to crawl up there, so no way of a suicide. His body was so deformed, he had no fingers or toes. The skin had literally dripped off. He smelled terrible, but the girls who found him walked the same route every day to school and said he was only there for one day. The tree had barely been affected by the rope, but his body made it clear he had been dead way before he was hung. The cops brushed it off and said it's not our problem, and claimed that he did it to himself on our city news. The cops around this town are known for being involved with drugs, like they raid drug houses so they can take the drugs for themselves or sell them, so them brushing this off was no surprise, just disturbing. Knowing someone could easily murder you and get away with it. An old woman in her 80s with Alzheimer's disappeared from her home in a small village near the bottom of a waterfall. Months went by. People looked everywhere for her, nothing. Almost a year later, someone decided to go near the top of a waterfall. For that, they had to leave the trail and climb down in the bushes. They stumbled across a pair of shoes, and then a skull. It was determined to be the old lady, but no one knows how on earth she arrived there or if someone helped. I think they couldn't even determine how she died. This was in 2020.